Okay, hello everybody and welcome back to another Bentley Davey Tutors video. This is the first in a 5-part series on Macbeth. And so what I'm going to be doing basically is I'm going to go through one video is one act, and I'm going to look at every scene. I'm going to look at every scene throughout that act, and I'm going to take a look at the context of what actually happens in the scene. I'm going to have a look at the language in the scene, loads of quotes. Going to look at motifs, going to look at themes, going to look at absolutely everything I can, so that you get a great knowledge of what actually happens in the play Macbeth. So, once again, I got a bit of a laugh last video about my comments on leaving likes. Obviously, I'll keep it the same. You don't have to leave a like or anything, but if you want to and if you like the video, we'd really appreciate it. That's pretty much what we're trying to do. We're trying to teach you as much stuff as we can, hopefully give you a bit of a laugh and teach it in a slightly more interesting way than if you were just reading notes. So, as I just mentioned, this is going to be the first video. This is Act 1 of Macbeth. So, as I just said, I'm going to go through each scene, look at the context of each scene, and then the language in the scenes. And so, obviously, different scenes have both different amounts of stuff in them, and then different amounts of stuff that are actually important. Because you could have two scenes that are the same length, but half of it's just waffle between two characters that doesn't actually matter that much to the play. So each scene will be a bit of a different length, but obviously we're going to start off now with Act 1, Scene 1. So this is a very famous scene. This is, you might have heard it referred to as the witches scene. So this is the scene right at the start of the play where you see the witches up upon the heath. So as I just said, it's outside on a heath, and bear with me here, I've got notes over just to the right. So that's what it is if I keep looking over there. And we hear that there's thunder and lightning there outside on the heath, which creates a very ominous mood. And so the witches represent the three fates of classical mythology. The witches were a huge part, and the supernatural generally was a huge part of Jacobean England and their approaches to life. They feverishly believed in the supernatural, and so this play was intended to play upon that. And a huge theme throughout the play is the idea of fate or free will. So was it fate that Macbeth would kill King Duncan and become king himself, or was it free will? Did he choose that? So it's basically, did the witches make him do it, or did he choose to do it himself? And so in terms of the language in this scene, it's mostly speaking by the witches, and so we see a bit of their talk and how they talk comes through the whole way through the play. So what they really try and do is things like double talk or enigma, and they speak in a way that's deliberately very hard to understand. For example, the quote, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." It's deliberately meant to mislead you, and it's contradictory. It's paradoxical language, which is seemingly illogical statements that can actually include some sort of truth. And so what that does is it deliberately obscures their meaning, which becomes more important later when Macbeth actually meets the witches, and especially becomes very important much later in the play in Act 4, maybe Act 5, when Macbeth goes back to meet the witches, and they give him 3 apparitions or 3 prophecies of what he has to be careful of, and he decides not to look too deeply into them, which gets him in a bit of trouble. But back to actually what we're looking at, which is Act 1. So the witches speak we've got a term called equivocation here, which is where you're deliberately misleading in order to sort of like get out of trouble or to mislead, to mislead someone. So here we hear things, as I said before, like fair is foul and foul is fair. Which is meant to make it sort of seem like they're saying one thing or saying another thing when they actually mean the other. So that's very deliberately confusing. But that's pretty much all that happens in that scene. It's just the witches talking, and then at the end they say, "When shall we 3 meet again?" And then they arrange to meet up with Macbeth after the battle has been won. So that takes us to Act 1, Scene 2. And so what we see in Act 1, Scene 2 is that order is restored after the battle between Scotland and Norway. The heroes and the warriors, including Macbeth, they're all heroes. Everybody's all very happy with them. And they are speaking in iambic pentameter, which is the means of speaking in a lot of Shakespearean plays, which shows sort of prosperity, and it shows that somebody's often a good character. And so there's a small scene here between this which shows the gap between the supernatural world and the actual battle, and it shifts between them, going between them to see what's going on there. And so what we see at the start of the play is how Macbeth is described. So there are 3 different phrases that are used to describe Macbeth, and actually I think there's a 4th one here, but we've got brave, valiant, worthy, and noble are all words used to describe Macbeth. And by the end of the play, they are certainly not being used to describe him anymore. But it suggests that Macbeth is a hero and that he's a courageous, good man. And this will very soon change a lot to Macbeth being one of the most hated people in Scotland. So in terms of what actually happens in the scene, they're outside on a gritty battlefield, and so there's a different reaction to killing on the battlefield for Macbeth. So Macbeth is a soldier. He's more a warrior than a soldier at this time, but he has a very different reaction, as we'll see later, between killing on the battlefield and killing somebody killing Duncan later on in the play, and also killing Banquo. So he's used to, when he's on the battlefield, killing somebody and they're actually then dead. But he's later, after he kills Banquo, he is haunted by Banquo's ghost, which deeply unnerves him. And then we see in this scene that Macbeth and Banquo at this point are shown as equals, and Macbeth is given the role of Thane of Cawdor because the old Thane of Cawdor was a traitor. So up next we're up to Act 1, Scene 3. Now this is a big scene, there's an awful lot of things in here, lots of quotes which I'm going to go through. There's whole big soliloquies, or what's called asides, which is where Macbeth basically goes off and talks to himself. It's a bit dodgy because, like, in terms of how it's acted, it's almost as though as soon as Macbeth turns his head away and starts talking a bit more quietly, it's like nobody else can hear him. But that's the idea. And he's quite lucky that nobody else can hear him because he's saying some things that probably you wouldn't want anybody else to hear. So we'll start off with Act 1, Scene 3. So we've got the language in this scene just to start with. So we hear that the first witch explains her actions that she's done on a sailor, which is just quite a bit of a troubling sort of bit to start off the scene that shows how powerful the witches are, which is actually so she basically speaks about how she'd tortured a sailor with a lack of sleep and ended up killing him, I think, which is actually a nod to King James, who was the King of England at the time of the play Macbeth being written. He had some troubles at sea, and it's a bit of a nod to that from Shakespeare. And so which shows the first motif of the play, which is a torture from the lack of sleep. This goes the whole way throughout the play, and all the way up until the end of the play with Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking. And so we hear a key line here, which is when Macbeth's first line in the play is so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So, in terms of actually analysing this line, so foul, so it's bad due to all the bloodshed of the battle, but then fair because it's good because they won the battle. So obviously you should have picked up here, so foul and fair a day I have not seen is very similarly linked to the witch's quote about being a foul and fair day. And so this is a nod of Macbeth's interaction with the witches. They haven't spoken before, they've never seen each other before, but you can see that they are tied together through a sense of maybe fate, you could say. And we can see that through the connection of this line. So then what we've got in terms of some context, so Macbeth and Banquo enter, and so the witches will give Macbeth 3 prophecies here. So they give him Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and then they say that he shall be king hereafter. So before meeting the witches, Macbeth was Thane of Glamis. That was true. He already had that position. But then the next prophecy was that he would be Thane of Cawdor, which he was thinking, well, no, that's not going to happen. The Thane of Cawdor, there's another one of them. And how they did it was that there couldn't really be 2 Thanes of Cawdor at the same time, because I guess that would just be a bit too confusing. So what we saw from Macbeth, he was like, okay, well, this is a bit ridiculous, that's not going to happen. But then about 20 minutes later, he is actually presented with Thane of Cawdor, which then sends him into a bit of a spiral of thinking, okay, this is quite strange. The witch's first prophecy was true about him being Thane of Cawdor, and then their next one was that he will be king, so he started then believing that. And so the witches say before each prophecy, they say, "All hail Macbeth," which implants the idea of power into his head. And so, so some quotes that we've got here. Macbeth says, "Speak, I charge you," which shows his morality and his need to know more. The witches then say to Banquo that he will be lesser than Macbeth and greater, which again is this double speak in this equivocatory language. And so the idea is that it's lesser in role because he won't be king, but greater in happiness and legacy, because a big part of the play that really tortures Macbeth is that Banquo's sons will be king. And so Macbeth knows that he has no lineage, nobody to pass his throne on to, but he knows that Banquo's sons will eventually be king. And so Banquo is saying to other kingsmen when they arrive that he, being Macbeth, seems rapt with all. Which shows that Macbeth at this point was already consumed with the idea of being king and can't even think about it or talk about it because he's so wrapped up in it. And so I'm just having a bit of a look back here, and so we've got so we've got some we've got those asides that I was talking about. So basically, what happened in that scene there? We're still in the same scene, so I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. But basically, what happened is. Macbeth and Banquo rocked up to the witch's little house area, thingo, it's not really a house, and they gave them 3 prophecies. So, they gave Macbeth, they said, shall be Thane of Glamis, he already was Thane of Glamis, then they said, will be Thane of Cawdor, and then they said, will be king hereafter. And then Banquo said, well, what can you tell me? And they said to Banquo that he will be lesser than Macbeth, but greater because he will be happier and he'll have a legacy. And then they also said that his sons will be king. So then we hear a bit of an aside from Macbeth. So Macbeth's aside is really quite nice. So he starts off with 2 truths are told. So those are those 2 truths, that he was Thane of Glamis, which was what they said, and then he became Thane of Cawdor because he was presented with Thane of Cawdor. And then he says as happy prologues to the swelling act. So basically what he's saying here is these are these 2 truths, they're happy, they're very good, but then the swelling act is him actually becoming king, which is the 3rd one. So it shows us his feelings, which he doesn't show to the other characters. That's the point of this aside or this soliloquy. It's basically showing us what he actually thinks, but what he won't tell people, because otherwise it'll be a bit dodgy, because they'd be like, well, this guy's bit sus, you could say, yeah. And then, yeah. So, he speaks, yes, so this line here, as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme, quite a nice use of imperial theme there. That basically just means being king, so he's quite happy with that. But then he says back in his supernatural soliciting, this is quite a nice thing. But back in his aside, he says, this supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. This is a really nice quote from Macbeth because it again shows that interlinking between him and the witches. It's deliberately paradoxical, and basically what he's saying here is this supernatural soliciting, which is the witch's prediction, cannot be ill, so it can't be bad, but it also can't be good. And so he goes on to explain this by saying, if ill, why hath it given me earnest of success commencing in a truth? So he's saying here, if it's bad, why did it tell me something good that was actually the truth? And then he says, if good, why do I yield to that suggestion, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Great quote, especially some of the bits in there. I really like whose horrid image doth unfix my hair. So basically he's saying, if this prophecy is good, why does it make me feel so bad about it? Because a big part of context here that flows throughout the whole play is that the idea that the king was chosen by God to be... there was a line of kings that was chosen by God. God had this natural order of how the kings would work. And so the only way that Macbeth could really be king is by killing King Duncan, which is regicide, and it is seen as one of the most terrible things that you could do at this time, because it was directly interrupting supposedly what God had intended. And so Macbeth's basically saying here, if this prophecy is good, why would it involve me having to do regicide, which really hurts me inside, basically. So he basically says, like, it can't be good, can't be bad. And so he's quite confused as to what to think about it. And so then he keeps going a bit more in his sort of aside. He sort of just waffles on for a little bit. And then he starts speaking to Banquo a little bit. And so Banquo says, again, to the lords, he says, look how our partner's wrapped. Again, that like wrapped with all before, showing that Macbeth is so entangled in this, he just can't get it out of his brain. And then Macbeth says a really nice quote here. He says, this is again to himself, if chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. This is basically his solution to it. So a big part of I've said a big part of stuff a lot of times, but I guess it's quite a long play. So Macbeth and Lady Macbeth both have different reactions to the whole idea of killing King Duncan. And they both think about the consequences, or don't think about the consequences, in different ways. So Macbeth throughout this whole scene has been all thinking up in his head. He's like, oh my goodness, what should I do? What should I do? Should I kill Duncan? Should I not kill Duncan? And he came to a fairly logical conclusion, which is, if chance will have me king, chance will crown me without my stir. Which is basically saying, if I am to be king, I don't have to do anything. Fate will do it for me, so I shouldn't act on it. Which is a good ending place. Luckily for Big Macbeth, he was like, maybe I'll do the murders, and then he came down to the idea, yeah, let's not do the murders, which was a good idea. Unfortunately, Lady Macbeth, this is a bit later, but Lady Macbeth has other plans. She's like, no, we are going to do the murders. So anyway, that ends up not being so great. So then Banquo says, new honours come upon him, like our strange garments cleave not to their mould, but with the aid of use. So this is a nice little motif, more so in the start of the play than at the end. It's not really anywhere at the end, but this is clothing imagery, and it feels as though Macbeth is uneasy in his new title. So like borrowed robes and strange garments are often used to express the fact that they are not happy with they don't feel comfortable in their new roles. And so that's sort of all that happens in the rest of that speech. And so Banquo, as I said before, he replied and he asked for his own prediction from the witches, which is, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair? That's when he's speaking to Macbeth. And he sort of says, why would you be scared of stuff, to Macbeth, that sounds so good? And this is because it's treason to believe that you're going to be king before the old king has died. And it seems as though the witches had read his mind, as Macbeth had already been sort of thinking about being king a bit. So Macbeth was a bit scared because he's like, well, they're reading my mind, that's kind of weird. And also he's a bit scared because he's like, well, I can't think about being king because that's treason and I could be put to death. And so again, we've got more of the clothing imagery that comes off. Yes. Okay. So the clothing imagery here, he says, why do you address me in borrowed robes? Showing again that the status... So, sorry, we're going to ignore my lack of continuity here, because the order of what I'm saying is a bit choppy and changey. But when he is given the title of Thane of Cawdor by the lords, he says, why do you address me in borrowed robes? Because this is at the point where he thinks, well, the old Thane's still alive, shouldn't really be that you shouldn't really be giving me that position because the old guy's still not dead. But yeah, so that's again that clothing motif. But it turns out the old guy is dead, so it doesn't matter that much.
Voiceover Jeremy here, just to fix something up. Turns out old Thane of Cawdor isn't actually dead. He's just a traitor, so he's now in captivity. But yeah, back to me talking about Macbeth. I hope you're enjoying it.
So Ross, when he gives Macbeth the title of Thane of Cawdor, uses the word hail, which again shows the symbolism to the witches, which is quite good. Again, a big part of this scene especially is all the intertwining between all the different people. And then at the end of the scene, Banquo thinks that he should let it be and let fate do whatever it wants to do, and what will be, basically, which is in contrast to Macbeth, who is completely consumed with the idea of these prophecies, and he sort of can't let it go. So that's a nice sort of bit of contrast there, which ends off our scene of Act 1, Scene 3. We are now up to Act 1, Scene 4. So we've got, I'm going to start off with the context and then do the language. This scene's pretty short. So in terms of the context in this scene, so Duncan actually opens this scene. He's the first one, this is his first appearance, and he's the first one to speak in this scene. And he asks whether or not the Thane was killed, this being the old Thane of Cawdor. And then after Malcolm says that the Thane was remorseful, so basically the old Thane of Cawdor was a traitor. He went to go and help the King of Norway to try and defeat Scotland. And Duncan, he was like, nah, mate, not very happy with that. And basically, Malcolm, who was, he's one of the king's sons, said, well, the Thane was very remorseful, and Duncan says that there is no way to read someone from their face. So he's basically insinuating the fact that this guy's literally just lying. He's not actually remorseful at all. And so Duncan then turns to Macbeth and says, and he calls him worthiest cousin. So we can see that there's a strong relationship with between Macbeth and Duncan, which gets a bit hairy when Macbeth decides to, kill Duncan. They don't love it as much, which is dramatic irony again from Shakespeare, because we know that Macbeth is a traitor. And Duncan then makes his son the Prince of Cumberland. He makes his son Malcolm the Prince of Cumberland. And Macbeth says, again to himself, I think he says, the Prince of Cumberland, I think he said that's something on which I must step, or something like that. Basically, he's not very happy, because he's like, well, Duncan, why are you out here making up this just random fake position of the Prince of Cumberland? Because Macbeth now knows if he wants to be king, he has to go and leapfrog Malcolm, which is going to be even harder to do. And he feels that it's also an insult on him. But basically, then language in the scene, there's really not that much of it. There's one key quote, but it is a very nice quote, which is good to use. So he says, "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." So this is basically Macbeth explaining how he wants no one to see his ambition. And it's also pathetic fallacy, and pathetic fallacy is a term used for when you call upon... So you probably know personification. Personification is basically where you personify something that is non-human. You give it human characteristics. Pathetic fallacy is similar to that, but that's where you directly call on something that is non-human to do something. So you could say, personification would be like the tree waved at me in the wind, but then pathetic fallacy, or I'll use an example from later, it's like come thick night, which is basically, that's when Lady Macbeth is calling, directly addressing the knight to come and do something for her, which is a bit dodgy. She's like come on, do it yourself. But anyway, so that takes us through Act 1, Scene 4. So we're now up to Act 1, Scene 5, which is quite, it's a bit longer. It's a Macbeth soliloquy, I think, and then we have Act 1, Scene 6 and 7 for the rest of the play. Scene 6 is tiny, Scene 7 is massive, so we will go through them both as they go. I was wrong there. Act 1, Scene 5 is actually Lady Macbeth's speech and her soliloquy. So this is the one where she hears from Macbeth. She gets a letter from Macbeth telling her what went on. So basically it starts off with Macbeth. So this is Lady Macbeth reading the letter. It says, they met me in the day of success, and I have learned by the perfectest report, which is that they believe that the word is good, that they have more in them than mortal knowledge. So this is basically saying the witches met me when we won battle, and it was good. They told me something was really good, and I learned that they actually had, they could see into the future. Then if we go on a bit further, Macbeth calls Lady Macbeth my dearest partner of greatness. This is Macbeth actually showing that him and Lady Macbeth are equal here, which is quite good for 17th century. Lady Macbeth believes that Macbeth is too kind, basically, to kill Duncan. She believes that he is loyal and that he just won't do it. The quote is, too full o' the milk of human kindness, which is basically saying he's too kind to kill the king, which is probably fair enough, but yeah. Then a messenger enters, with the lovely stage direction, enter a messenger, and the messenger basically says, the king is coming here tonight, and Lady Macbeth says, thou art mad to say it. She's basically like, you gotta be joking, that's such great news. I've just been told that we've got to kill the king to then be king, and he's coming here to my house. Pretty dodgy again, because it's like, well, he's coming to your house. You don't really need to like go and kill him. But anyway, they'll deal with it. They'll deal with it. Well, sorry everybody, just took a quick break, and I've learned that this video is so far about 25 minutes long. So I'm going to try and speed up, because you are probably a bit bored of Macbeth. Right, so yes, so the messenger then leaves, and Lady Macbeth gives a nice little speech, which has a lot of cool quotes in there that show some stuff. So, she basically says that the raven himself is horse. Ravens are seen as an omen here and show ominousness and death. And then is horse, which is... And so it's basically saying the raven is croaking so much because they know that Duncan will die. And then so we can skip a little line there because it's not that useful. But then this is more pathetic fallacy, which is, come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here. So that's basically saying, hey, witches and other spirits, come here, get rid of my gender and my femininity so that I have the power in me to be able to kill Duncan. So she's trying to not be a woman so that she has the courage to kill Duncan. This was very outdated opinions of what women could do. But yeah, so women were basically conceived at this time to be too kind to kill anyone. And so she sees gender as an obstacle. And so she wants to basically get rid of it because she thinks that it's something that will stop her from becoming queen. Okay, and then she says, and fill me from the crown to the toe, which is the head to the toe, top full of direst cruelty, which is basically make me a bad person. And then a bit later she says, that has no compunctious visitings, which says don't allow any remorse in me after I plot this and kill Duncan. And then we can skip a little bit more, and she says, and take my milk for gall, which means take away any abilities to have a child, because, again, having children was quite a womanly thing, so she's trying to make herself can be unwomanly. And children, big motif in Macbeth. Basically, the Macbeths are very, tortured by the fact that they can't have children, and that other people, specifically Banquo, can have children. They're like, well, that's bad. But yeah, and then she says again, bit more pathetic fallacy, come thick night, which again, yeah, pathetic fallacy, which directly addresses something that is not human. And she says, come thick night and pile thee in the dunnest smoke of hell. Which, yes, it's a very light-hearted scene. So then we get an end to Macbeth. And so she says to Macbeth, great Glamis, worthy Cawdor, greater than both by the all hail hereafter, thy letters have transported me beyond. Yeah, great. They like each other at this point, not soon. Anyway, so that basically says, thank you, good work, you're this person, and you're also this Thane, and wow, you'll be king. She calls it this ignorant present, which suggests that she wants more to be satisfied. And then she says, your face, my Thane, is a book where men may read strange matters. That's after a couple of things. So basically, Macbeth says, my dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight. And she says, and when goes hence? And then Macbeth says, tomorrow, as he purposes. And then Lady Macbeth says, oh, never shall sun that morrow see. Your face, my Thane, is a book where men may read many strange matters. So she can see that he has an internal battle going on. And she also understands that that appearances can be very deceiving, which is quite helpful for them. She then says, to beguile your time, look like the time, bear welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue. Then it's look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. This is a great quote, which basically says, look innocent, but be evil. It's very nice. Nice quote. Saying very nice, it's not the best way to be a person, but it's fine. Then they waffle on a little bit more and they're like, no, let's not kill Duncan. And then Lady Macbeth's like, yes, let's kill Duncan. And then Macbeth's like, And then she says, leave the rest to me. Which is basically leave the plotting to me, and she'll plot it. Right, so then more stuff. We watched a bit of a video on this, so I've got some notes from from that, basically the biggest part of that was that Lady Macbeth really, really, really wanted to be queen and wanted to be a good wife because she failed as a mother. We hear that, I think it's a bit later, that the Macbeths did have a child, but their child passed away in infancy. So women at this stage were expected to do two things: be a mother and be a wife. And so Lady Macbeth had failed to be a mother, so she really, really wanted to try hard to be a wife, which is why she was pushing so hard to be queen, because she knew that Macbeth wanted to be queen. So that's the end of Act 1, Scene 5. We've then got Act 1, Scene 6, really short, and then Act 1, Scene 7, which is an entire Macbeth soliloquy, and I'm looking at my notes here, and I have ridiculous quantities, so that's fine, we'll get through it. Right, so Act 1, Scene 6, Lady Macbeth opens here when she's talking to King Duncan, and Lady Macbeth is duplicitous here. She's two-faced, she's kind to Duncan, while basically plotting to kill him at the same time. That's all that happens there. That seems boring. Nobody cares. Act 1, Scene 7, however, is an important Macbeth soliloquy, which is tossing up the consequences of regicide. Tosses up the consequences of regicide, and whether or not it's a good idea. So this is the famous to be or not to be speech. No, it's not. Just kidding. That's Hamlet.
Voiceover for Jeremy here again, just to apologise for how awfully unfunny that was. I don't know why I ever included that. Now back to Act 1, Scene 7, which I've apparently said is important. I don't know.
This is the famous. It's not as famous, but that's fine. It opens with I think this is my favourite quote from the entirety of Macbeth, which is, "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly." I only like it because it's got so many weird words like "twere." But basically that's saying, if I'm gonna do it, I'd better do it quickly. And so it's deliberately confusing, this quote, to show that he's not very certain of anything. So we start off, it speaks a lot in this soliloquy about that if killing the king would be the only consequence, that he would be okay. But then he speaks about the consequences of going to heaven/hell. He says, we jump to the fire to come. No, sorry, we jump to the life to come. And so there are basically two main reasons that Macbeth presents why he shouldn't kill Duncan. These are, number one, he is his subject, and number two, he is his host. So Macbeth, firstly on his subject, he says, "I'm his kinsman and his subject." That's the quote. Basically he's saying he's Duncan's best mate, best warrior, and so he probably shouldn't kill him because that'd be a bit dog. Then he's his host. So he's hosting Duncan at his home, so he shouldn't really kill him. And there's a nice quote, which is, "As his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself." Really nice quote, basically saying, I should not let the murderers in. That's my job, not to actually kill him myself. And then in the second part of the speech, he speaks about how Duncan isn't only a king, but he's a good king. With the quote being, "Duncan hath borne his faculties, so meek hath been so clear in his great office." Basically saying Duncan's a good king. He's not exactly a bad person, like he's fine. There's also some religious imagery that gets tossed around in here. He uses the quote, "deep damnation." Macbeth knows that the consequences of his actions is that he will go to hell. And he says, tears will drown the wind. This shows the sheer natural chaos that will ensue if he does do the killing of Duncan. Okay, we've got another motif. It's been dragging on for way too long, but it's fine. We've got another motif. This motif is the destruction of the natural order. As I was talking about before, the idea here was that the kings were all in a line that God had chosen. And so when you disrupt that, the natural order, which is like how the world functions, kind of dips. It's like, no, we're not happy with that. So what that basically meant here was that we get told after Duncan dies that the night was very rough, and that Duncan's horses actually ate each other, and a whole bunch of things just come falling apart in the world. So he knows that if he kills Duncan, the world will basically revolt against him. And then finally he says, "I have no fear to pick the sides of my intent, but only culting ambition." So basically what he's saying is the only thing that makes that makes me do what he does, which is killing Duncan, is his ambition. He knows that that's his major flaw, and that's the only thing. So then Lady Macbeth enters, and he says, he immediately says, we will proceed no further with this. We will proceed no further with this. He is certain now that he will not be killing Duncan. He's certain that this is wrong and that it is not the right thing to do. Then Lady Macbeth's like, I'm going to convince him to actually still to kill Duncan. So we've got, again, the clothing motif. So, sorry, this, I'll be more better. So, this part of the scene is basically where Lady Macbeth and Macbeth sort of argue, and Lady Macbeth is trying to belittle him enough to get him to kill Duncan. So she basically says, so there's the clothing motif. Macbeth says, which would be worn now in this newest gloss. So he's saying we should just stick, I think I said gloss there, gloss. He's basically saying we should just stick with what we've got. We're the Thane of Glamis and Cawdor now. That's pretty cool. Let's not do anything else. And then, again on the clothing motif, Lady Macbeth responds with, wherein you drunk when you dressed yourself. Basically she's saying, were you drunk when you were getting yourself dressed? She's basically calling him dumb. Then she goes and belittles his manhood, which is a nice little technique that she uses the whole way through the play. And so she says, to be the same in thine own act and valour. Basically, she's saying you should act the way that you want and be better. And then she says, and you would be so much more than what you were. You would be so much more the man. She's basically saying, if you killed Duncan, you'd be so much more the man. So Lady Macbeth, she's a great person, really just good for mental health. So then we have the closing of this speech, where she says, this is where she's talking about how she had a child, and she's basically saying, and the quote is, and dashed the brains out. She's speaking about how she would rather get a child and dash the brains out of it and kill it to be queen. She'd rather that than not being queen. She wants queen that much. And then she says, screw your courage to the sticking place, because the idea is that Macbeth is super courageous and so good, but then she's like, well, no, clearly not. You don't want to kill Duncan. And then finally, she says, false face must hide what the false heart must know. Good quote. It's again saying your face must hide what your heart actually thinks. So don't let everybody know that you're going to kill the king, because that's a bad idea. So we've got some language in the scene. Again, you'd be so much more the man, belittles him and repeats the idea of him not being a man. And then Lady Macbeth and Macbeth here in this scene share lines, which shows their closeness at this point. And then we also see some antithesis. The scene of the killing of the baby opposes our idea of motherhood from Macbeth. And so then we've got, I've just done a little part here on the attraction of the evil. It's not super important for the whole understanding of what actually happens in the play, but just in terms of, what actually attracts the evil here. So Lady Macbeth is trying to get Macbeth to kill Duncan, and Lady Macbeth is basically like, well, it'd be so great if we could just be king and queen. But then after Macbeth's like, no, we will proceed no further in this, Lady Macbeth becomes very accusatory, says, were you drunk? You would be so much more the man. And then basically says, you're not very cool. So then what actually attracts them to the evil? Well, for Macbeth, the witches attract him to the evil of killing Duncan because they implanted the idea or reaffirmed the idea. That's something that's highly contested as to whether they gave him the idea of killing Duncan or whether he was already planning on it and they just reaffirmed it. And then also his ambition. This is his fatal flaw. All main characters of Shakespeare's tragedies have fatal flaws, and that's what ends up spiralling them into death. But then the costs for him are his moral conscience. He knows he'll go to hell, and regicide, which he knows interrupts the natural order and makes the world go, hey, I don't really like that very much, and then starts doing weird stuff. And then for Lady Macbeth, what attracts her to the evil is a chance to succeed as a mother, succeed as a wife where she failed as the mother, and then her ambition as well. She believes that the crown is the most important thing to her. And in terms of the costs for her, this is the big difference between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth doesn't see any costs. She's like, well, regicide, probably bad, but, it's fine. And so yeah, she actually looks to the evil or to the unnatural straight away with the calling on like come these spirits. So she's sort of quite chill about the whole thing when she really shouldn't be because it's quite murdery. But that does bring us to the end of Act 1, Scene 7, and therefore the end of Act 1. This video is ridiculously long. I can't promise that the other ones won't be, because they probably will, but that's alright, hopefully. I've gone into a lot of detail. I'll put timestamps in the description so you can skip around to different scenes. I'll probably put that in at the start as well, because that would be quite helpful, wouldn't it? But that's alright. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. Yes, so hope you enjoyed that. All 5 videos are being filmed pretty much one after the other now. So as soon as I finish this one, I'm going to film Act 2. So they should all be released quite a similar time. So just watch them when you can, I guess, if you want to, if you're that interested. If you're not, actually, if you've made it to this point, thank you. That's very impressive. But yeah, the rest of the videos will be coming out probably, after this one. They should all be out at a similar time, depending on my work ethic, but that's fine. Remember, leave a like if you did enjoy. You don't have to, but it'd be great. Thank you, and goodbye.